Hey, it's Andrew Huang. Let's talk about some weird music production stuff. Gonna start over here on the big synth. Although you can definitely recreate what I'm about to do on a computer. This first tip is about making a part more fun using stereo effects. And I don't know if you're like me with this, but whenever I hear a sound like being panned around the stereo field, it takes me out of the song. It's so obvious, and it kind of like just draws attention to itself as a production thing. But sometimes you have a mono sound source and you want to do something interesting in stereo with it. And one cool thing for that is filtering the left and right channels slightly differently, which I'll demonstrate here with the Patching Panda Moon Phase. Louis at Patching Panda sent me a few modules to check out a while ago, so major thanks to him. Basically, you're taking the same sound, but different parts of its frequency spectrum are getting spread left and right. Let me play an example. So you're hearing the operat oscillator, and it's playing this simple sequence with no dynamics at all. Now, if I patch it through Moon Phase, we can start to hear what it sounds like to have different parts of the frequency spectrum being represented left and right. Now I'm gonna patch in a trigger that will rhythmically change the mode of the filter. So every note or every couple of notes, we're gonna switch between different pairs of filters. It might be low pass on the left and high pass on the right, or band pass on the left and notch on the right. And then we get this really nice stereo effect. And in a way, it's more extreme than your typical auto pan because, it's kind of really bouncing around, and, you might want to dial that into taste. But also, it's less extreme in that there's still some of the signal on both channels at once. Whereas with a usual auto pan, you're kind of like going all the way to one side and all the way to the other. It'll be like a very focused point of the signal that you can feel moving back and forth between your two ears, which maybe occasionally you want. I very rarely do, and so I like that in this setup. At most settings, you have some of the signal present at both sides of the stereo spectrum. Now, I think it should be pretty simple to recreate this in Ableton, so I've brought the exact same sound in, a recording from the modular. Drag a filter onto this track. We will put that in a group and duplicate this chain. So we've got two identical pathways, parallel paths with these filters on them. Pan one left, pan one right. Let's do band pass for both of them. Yeah, that's cool. Now if we throw some modulation on that, I'm assigning max for live LFOs to both filters' frequencies. Tweak the settings a bit. Give them each slightly different resonance settings, different LFO rate. Yeah, that's just such a nicer, more natural feeling way to have a sound swim around your head than just by automating the panning back and forth. One thing I want to make a note of is if you're doing this on a stereo sound source, I would put a utility on each of those channels before the filter. And I have one set to the left channel and one set to the right channel. All right, my next tip is if you're using a reverb send, shape the sound before going to the reverb. A lot of reverbs give you a little pre-reverb EQ. You might be familiar with that, so you can shape which part of the sound is gonna be affected by the reverb. Typically you wanna get rid of some lows so it's not muddy, and get rid of some highs so it's not really harsh and washed out. But you might also wanna consider other ways to affect just the sound that's gonna be reverberated, either for creative uses or just for a better mix. So for an example I've got here, listen to how this rim shot occasionally gets sent to this reverb. So just a nice little accent reverb, but let me zoom in here. If you look at these rim shot MIDI triggers, you can see that I'm actually omitting the initial transient from the reverb. Now, if we pull that automation back, we can hear what the reverb would be like on the entire rim shot sound compared to what I had before. And again, without that volume automation. So a lot more pronounced, a lot more high end, and you know, it sounds fine, but it wasn't what I wanted for this track, and I felt like mellowing it out this way rather than EQing it gave it a bit more of a natural feel. Another handy use for this trick is with vocals. If on the reverb track you put an extra de-esser before the reverb that is doing a lot more de-essing than whatever normal de-essing you have on your regular vocal track, that reduces all of the cuts back on how much noise is getting reverberated in your vocal reverb. And then for creative uses, I mean, the options are limitless. Put a distortion before the reverb, put a flanger before the reverb, like just experiment and you can get these more interesting reverb trails than the usual just like dry signal going into it. My next tip is kind of related to what we just talked about, but it is a much more specific effect, and that is formant shifting the delay send of a vocal. Probably could be cool in other cases as well, but this is what I've done with this trick a lot, use it on vocals. So if you've got your delay send set up, you'd put a formant shifting effect on it, like Altar Boy or the Sauce, and then as the delays are echoing out, just modulate that formant parameter. Yeah, 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 yeah. I first discovered this trick while working on my track You. And I did it again on Turn Away. Don't wanna turn away. I don't wanna lose us. So just a fun little one that I don't think I've seen elsewhere, and I like it a lot. I think I'm in danger of overusing it in the future. This next tip is one of my favorite things to do with any synth that round robins its oscillators. So with every new note you play, it switches to a different oscillator. And what I like to do is tune the oscillators to different octaves or fifths. And then when you play a simple pattern, it suddenly becomes this much more complex thing that you otherwise wouldn't have come up with. So I'm gonna do this on the Matriarch, which has 4 oscillators, and for this whole demonstration, I'm gonna play the same 5-note pattern. And it's important that when you do this, you have a different number of oscillators than notes in the sequence, because that is what causes the round robining to generate these more complex sequences, because it doesn't line up to the same notes every time. Let me show you what I mean. So all the oscillators are tuned to the same pitch right now, and this is the sequence I'm gonna play. Now moving things around in octaves and fifths tends to be the least dissonant, so let's see what happens if I switch the second oscillator down an octave. Now I'll move the third oscillator down a fifth. Let's try the fourth oscillator up a fifth. So playing the exact same thing on the keyboard, I now have this much longer and more interesting pattern. And you know, if I just changed what I was playing occasionally, that would add even more complexity very easily. And then of course, you know, I'm on the Matriarch here. I gotta throw it through its beautiful delay. All right, this next one I haven't even tried yet, but I think it'll be cool. I just heard about this recently from R. Benny. The tip or the trick is using field recordings as modulation. Let's go outside and record something. Birds. Also traffic and the neighbor's AC buzzing, but I think it'll work fine. Let's see what happens if we apply this to that Matriarch stuff we were just messing with. We'll overlap the 2 tracks, mute the birds, put the Max for Live envelope follower on the bird track, and then I will apply it to a filter on the Matriarch track. By the way, if you're not familiar with an envelope follower, it's just creating a signal that follows the volume of whatever is coming into it. Let's dial it in. What if we EQ out the lows from this bird recording so it is a lot more just the birds? We could adjust the response of the envelope follower, get it a little more molassesy, maybe compress the signal a bit so we avoid those big volume spikes. I have a suspicion that Live's envelope follower is not quite audio rate. Like, I think it's smoothing things out automatically, even at the lowest rise and fall settings. Let's throw these birds into the modular and see what happens in the analog domain. All right, I've got this hooked up so I can play the birds into the modular now. There they are. But I'm gonna take that signal, and instead of feeding it into my mixer, I'm gonna take it to control the filter of what we were hearing at the beginning of this video. Well, that's messy, but you can hear the birds even poking through just from modulating this signal so quickly. All right, I've removed the filter from the chain. Now we're just listening to the oscillator. I want to put the birds into different parts of the oscillator. Slowly increasing the frequency modulation amount. If we go more extreme, it kind of turns into weird percussion. Let's put it to the pulse width modulation. Gives it a bit of grittiness. All right, so that's fun, but it gets noisy very quickly, and you know, great if you're into noise. I think that the most common use case for me is gonna be heavily attenuating it and finding those sweet spots where it's just adding that little bit of jitter to a parameter in a way that's not predictable the way that it would be if you were sending like a fast LFO or just some like white noise modulation. So yeah, cool. Hope you enjoyed that. If you got another tip you want to share in the comments or something else you want me to try in a future video, I would love to hear from you. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.